Thank you. So we have about 14 minutes to solve some of the world's greatest problems. Who wants to go first? No takers. I guess I'll have a go. So I'm here today to talk to you about some things that we may be able to do to minimize our prison systems and to reduce the destructive cycle of reoffense that those of us in the field call recidivism. I thought to myself, well, this could be very, very interesting, because perhaps I can make some clever observations about how today's so-called society's misfits could be tomorrow's pioneers, and take this very, very complex problem and package it all up in a box and tie it up with a pretty bow and present it to you that way. But in the wake of some of the headlines that we've been seeing from the United States recently, and from other places around the world, and even in the UK, I felt it would be doing a real disservice to the subject as well as to the people affected if we were to try to sweeten the conversation to make it a bit more palatable. Because this conversation is not neat, and it's not tidy, and it's uncomfortable, and it's emotional. Because we have to talk about things like poverty and inequality and maybe even racism and crime and prison and survival and probation and social services and unemployment and public policy. And we all have very strong feelings about this. So you can understand that when some people try to tackle these issues, it can become overwhelming very quickly. But we must try to make a start at it, because in my opinion, it is one of the greatest human tragedies that is unfolding around the globe, and it's happening right in our backyards. So to make a start at trying to make some order out of this mess, I would like to introduce you to a friend of mine called G. Now, G is 22 years old, and he was born into a community that was ravaged by poverty, social exclusion, and economic inequality. And by accident of birth, he was automatically enrolled in this vicious, destructive cycle that, while it was catalyzed by poverty, it was really fueled by the need to survive and desperation. And that can sometimes lead to crime, and that can sometimes lead to violence, which ultimately leads to prison, which then puts them through the system into probation and social services and unemployment. And now that they have a record, it's very difficult to find a job. So if they're lucky, maybe they get a low-paid annual, minimum wage job that pays them a few quid an hour that they know that they can't survive on, and they go back to the communities and start the cycle all over again. Now, at 8 years old, just like many of his friends and role models, G was recruited into the economic engine that sits at the heart of many of these communities, and that's called the gang enterprise. Okay? Now, he was recruited to be groomed for a career in this enterprise, just like many of his role models, climbing up the ladder of that organization, which, by the way, is structured almost identically to any mainstream organization out in the greater global community. And by the time G was 18 years old, he was running significantly lucrative lines of business, and for his trouble, he was rewarded with a compensation package that was the equivalent of incentive paid salary, bonuses, the use of company car and driver, maybe even family benefits, life insurance should something happen to him, and most importantly to G, he had the opportunity to gain responsibility, respect, and status in the community, just like any of us might aspire to do in the greater global community. Now, he did all of these things, as did his friends and role models, knowing full well that this was illegal and it was dangerous. And in fact, they accepted these these were normal terms of their employment. Okay? Now, why would G make that choice? Well, basically because he really believes, as does his friends, that this is the only opportunity that he has to have a career other than a low-paying manual labor job. Now, why would he have that perception? So in order to understand that, we need to look at what might be the only opportunity that G or any of his friends have to interact with the greater global community. So where does that start to happen? Well, unfortunately, it starts to happen when G goes to prison. So let's take a look at what that looks like. So if this is the local community, and if this is the greater global community, it's right here in the center where that intersection occurs, where that interaction takes place, and the perceptions on both sides of that intersection are formed. So G now goes to prison because the inevitable occurred, and he was arrested, and now he's in prison. So what does that feel like to him? Well, first of all, he's a bit resentful because in his mind, he's just trying to make a living like anybody else with the only thing that is open to him. So now he's in prison, and of course, he's there, and it's a scary place, so he feels fear, and he feels frustration, and he feels, it's a scary place, so there's mistrust, and he doesn't know which side of the bars the danger are coming at him from, so he doesn't know who he can trust. But he does what he can, and he waits it out, and he's now released, and he goes into probation, okay? And it's here where his self-confidence begins to become eroded. Because what happens here is that it's like a big, fancy, glorified babysitting service. He's a grown man, but his life is not his own. They track him everywhere. He has to check in wherever he goes. And the frustration grows, and the mistrust grows. And maybe there's even a little bit of anger at this point, because he had this great career, and now he's being babysat. And now he's also interacting with social services. So now this young man who had a nice career, respect in the community, and a decent living, has lost his living, and he's on benefits for himself and his family. And he's ashamed, and he's embarrassed, and his confidence becomes further eroded. And he's probably getting a bit more angry. And he's also looking for a job, and he can't find one because now he has a record. And maybe, again, if he's lucky, G happened to find a job flipping hamburgers for £7 an hour, knowing full well that he wasn't going to be able to survive on this money, so he goes back into the community. And so now you can see why G and some of his friends make the decisions they do to re-enter a life of crime in order to survive. So we look at the perceptions that G has formed while he was having that interaction with the greater global community, and it were perceptions that were based on fear and resentment and anger and frustration and low self-esteem and little to no expectation whatsoever that the greater global community will ever give him an opportunity to contribute anything other than low-paid manual labor. So that's where his perception comes from. Now let's look at it from the global community's point of view. Well, they're having the same experience, aren't they? Because now G is in prison, and they're looking at this guy, and they're saying, uh-oh, this guy's done something. He can't be trusted. He must be a bad guy. We have to keep our eye on him. We don't know what, maybe we even have to be afraid of him. So again, we have mistrust and fear. Now G's in probation, and still has to be watched, and he's wearing one of those fancy bracelets that keep track of him. And wait a minute, don't those cost a lot, and aren't I paying for those out of my tax money? So now it's starting to hit my pocketbook, and now I'm getting frustrated. And now I'm feeling resentful. So I've got fear, mistrust, and resentment and anger now. And he's on benefits with his family, and I don't understand why this guy can't get a regular job, and it's deeper into my pockets, and it's affecting my family's life and my hard-earned pounds, and now G's looking for a job, and we're thinking to ourselves out here, well, I'm not going to give him a job. This guy can't be trusted. I don't know. And even if I was inclined to give him a job, I own an advertising agency. This guy can only do manual labor, it seems, so what's he going to do for me? So little or no expectation from G or G's friends that they can contribute anything more of value than a low-paid manual labor job. Okay? So now I want to switch the conversation from a social conversation to an economic conversation. And to do that, I want to give you an example of how we as a global community have in the past tackled difficult problems like this. So I want to talk to you a little bit about our environment. So not so very long ago, the best minds in science and our governments and activists made it loud and clear that the clock was ticking, and unless we did something quick, we were going to kill our planet. Okay? So how did we respond to this as a global community? Well, we all got together, we held summits, we brought in all of our best scientific minds, we threw a ton of money at them, and we said, okay, guys, go to work. We've got to figure this out because we don't have much time left. So what did these people do? They took this money they had and they started to take a look at the resources, our practice and our policies and our resources, and how we go about perhaps looking into the resources that have been discarded or dismissed or perhaps passed over, and figured out ways to draw new value out of these dismissed resources to be applied to these terribly important issues and to try to stop and reverse this destructive cycle that we've created for ourselves. Now, let's get back to our topic. Currently, as we speak, there are 86,000 people sitting behind bars in the UK prisons. And according to the latest productivity numbers, that represents just under £3 billion annually of wasted productivity and human resources that are just sitting there behind bars. Now, to try to figure out how we might be able to have the same kind of response for this issue as we did for the environment, we have to go back and look at G's and his friends' experience in that gang enterprise. Now, if you remember, what I said was that these gang enterprises are almost identically structured to many enterprises out in the mainstream global community. So while G was climbing up that ladder from the time he was 8 years old to the time he was 18, over the course of 10 years of practical experience, he was collecting valuable business skills that, even though the application of these business skills were for illegal purposes, they were business skills nevertheless that can be transferred to any legitimate enterprise. So on his way up this ladder, G and his friends have acquired a packed full toolbox of enterprise and business skills that taught him how to lead, how to manage operations, finance, distribution, sales, marketing, practical experience that could be very valuable in another application. Now, what's interesting is that in addition to all of those practical skills, G and his friends also picked up some things that even the best of our business graduates don't have, because it requires practice, not books, to learn. So, in this immediate environment where G and his friends did business, as you can imagine, very volatile. You never knew at any given moment what was going to change, where the danger might come from that could actually be life-threatening. So G and his friends had to learn a few things that other people don't necessarily learn, and that is resilience, adaptation, and the ability to think on their feet, critical thinking that could be applied to solving problems quickly as they arise. Now, they also applied this critical problem solving to their very limited resources to figure out the best way and the most valuable ways to leverage what they had. Now, in most business schools, that's called innovation. So what if we did like we do for the environmental issues? What if we called in our best business brains and we took some of that money that we spend every day keeping these young men locked up and in low-paying manual positions, And we formed some companies, some enterprises, and put them right in the heart of these communities to replace the economic engines that are currently there, gang enterprise. And what if we took these young men who have all of these amazing practical skills and put those skills and those resources to use inside these organizations? And maybe they're even social enterprises that give back to the communities that they're there to help build the economic structures and to help them become positive role models for the new little G's that are coming up the ladder. And now, what you've got is so-called society's misfits that have become pioneers who change that mutual experience inside the intersection. And instead of frustration and mistrust and no expectations, what you have now is contribution, social inclusion, economic equality, and opening the doors to opportunities for interaction, positive interaction with the greater global community. And so these young men become pioneers forging a path into the greater global community, bringing fresh ideas, new perspectives, and an equal value exchange for a sustainable future. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.